अस्सलाम वालेकुम फ्रेंड, वेलकम टू माय चैनल पाक बंगला रिएक्ट। मेरा नाम अहमद अब्बास है
और मेरा नाम सलमान है।
तो फ्रेंड्स, आप सब खैरियत से होंगे और आज हम फिर से हाजिर हैं एक नई वीडियो के साथ। वीडियो का टाइटल है जी, वाई बांग्लादेश इकॉनमी इज
बूमिंग।
बूमिंग। तो देखते हैं जी
इकॉनमी
वीडियो
बूम ब्लास्ट कर रही है।
कैसी होने वाली है वीडियो। लगता है कि वीडियो बहुत ज़्यादा
इकॉनमी यार इनकी बेस्ट है, ये
इंटरेस्टिंग
मानने
होने
की
वाली
बात
है।
है।
और अगर आपने अभी तक हमारे चैनल को सब्सक्राइब नहीं किया तो जल्दी से चैनल को सब्सक्राइब करें और कमेंट्स करें और ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा शेयर करें। तो फ्रेंड, चलते हैं वीडियो की तरफ।
Among South Asian economies, Bangladesh is touted as a rising star. In 2019, its per capita income was $1,856, substantially higher than Pakistan's $1,285 and only $250 less than of India. In 2020,
इंडिया से भी थोड़ा सा कम है।
Bangladesh might have edged ahead of India
पाकिस्तान से तो
because
ज्यादा
it
है पर
registered a
कैपिटा में।
growth rate of 2.4%, whereas India's GDP shrank by 7.3%. The figures put it ahead of the other Asian countries, including India. It could shed its least developed country status in 5 years. When it first became a country in 1971, Bangladesh was incredibly poor. The GDP growth rate was minus 14%. Politically, instability was rife, and the nation was devastated by floods and famine. Things have moved. Bangladesh now has an average growth rate of 8%, well above the Asian average, and Asian Development Bank figures show. A decline in population growth is also helping an increase in per capita income. The number of unemployed workers living below the poverty line dropped from 73.5% in 2010 to 10.4% in 2018. The economy of Bangladesh is characterized as a developing market economy. It is the 37th largest in the world in nominal terms and 31st largest by purchasing power parity. It is classified among the next 11 emerging market, middle-income economies and a frontier market. In the first quarter of 2019, Bangladesh was the world's 7th fastest growing economy with a rate of 8.3 real GDP annual growth. Dhaka and Chittagong are the principal financial centers of the country, being home to the Dhaka Stock Exchange and the Chittagong Stock Exchange. The financial sector of Bangladesh is the third largest in the Indian subcontinent. Bangladesh is one of the world's fastest growing economies. And to calculate, Bangladesh rises to the South Asia standout star as India, Pakistan fall behind. India, eternally confident about being the only South Asian economy that matters, now must grapple with the fact that it too is poorer than Bangladesh in per capita terms. Between 2011 and 2019, Bangladesh's exports grew 8.6% every year, compared to the world average of 0.4%. The success is largely due to the country's relentless focus on products such as apparel, in which it possesses a comparative advantage. Meanwhile, the share of Bangladeshi women in the labor force has consistently grown, unlike in India and Pakistan, where it has decreased. And Bangladesh has maintained a public debt to GDP ratio between 30% and 40%. India and Pakistan will both emerge from the pandemic with public debt close to 90% of GDP. Fiscal refrains has allowed Bangladesh's private sector to borrow and invest. Bangladesh's success brings its own set of problems. For one, its exports benefit from the country's participation in various mechanisms that allow tariff-free access to developed economies. These groupings are only open to the world's least developed countries. Thanks to its growth, Bangladesh will likely have to give up these privileges by 2026 or so. As its economy matures, its comparative advantages will also change. Like Vietnam and others, it will then have to shift emphasis away from garments to higher value exports. The transition will test Bangladesh as it has those other nations. The government needs a strategy for the next decade that focuses on new forms of global integration and on a continued transformation of the economy. The smartest thing to do would be to retain access to the developed world's market by signing free trade agreements. Work has started on the FTA with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, according to Bangladeshi officials, but there's a lot more to be done. Once again, Bangladesh should become benchmark itself against Vietnam, which is not only part of the China-centric Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership and the successor to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but also signed an FTA with the European Union in 2019. In 1971, success seemed well beyond a long shot. Today, the country's 160 million plus people, packed into a fertile delta that's more densely populated than the Vatican City, seem destined to be the South Asia's standout success. Bangladesh's growth story has been a much touted one. The GDP growth averaged around 6% from 2000 to 2019, the World Bank data shows. It was not long before the term GDP growth became a catchphrase in the country. This is primarily because policymakers have ardently portrayed this metric as a vital sign of development, as it is reflected both in economic progress and human well-being. The majority of Bangladeshis have little idea how and whether at all this growth impacts their happiness. The GDP growth is an outlandish concept for the poor and those making a living in the informal economy. Even in 2020, when the coronavirus pandemic rocked economies around the world, Bangladesh managed it to be an outlier. It posted a 2.3% growth. That year, the economy of its neighbor India shrank by 7.9%. In fact, all South Asian countries registered negative growth in 2020 except for Bangladesh and Pakistan. In June, Bangladesh Finance Minister Mustafa Kamal said that the country would be on top of the rest of the South Asia and Southeast Asia in terms of GDP growth, considering the recent pace of the economy. Certainly, it would be an enviable achievement, but would Bangladeshis be significantly happier then? In fact, Bangladesh's poor happiness ranking shows there is another side of GDP growth story that involves a not so happy reality. In 2021 World Happiness Report, Bangladesh ranked 68 among 95 nations. The report specially focused on how the pandemic had affected the happiness levels of nations. Why is that? If only high GDP growth could make a nation increasingly happier, Bangladesh's happiness ranking should have leapt to prominence over time. Yes, economic growth has improved living standards globally. Bangladesh has also made significant strides in poverty reduction as its economy has grown. Poverty declined from 44.2% in 1991 to 13.8% in 2016 and 17. Life expectancy and literacy rates have increased markedly as well. So the biggest challenge Bangladesh faces is related to how the country ensures that the fruit of growth and development reach people at the bottom of the economic pyramid.
तो सलमान भाई क्या कहना चाहेंगे आप हमारे प्यारे बांग्लादेश के बारे में?
वही है कि बहुत ज़्यादा जो है ना इन्होंने फास्ट ग्रोइंग की है। जीडीपी तो यार हमें पता है कि पाकिस्तान से पर कैपिटा में तो ज़्यादा है, इंडिया के भी बहुत करीब है,
और कुछ सालों में उनकी ये स्ट्रगल रही तो बहुत ज़्यादा आगे निकल जाएंगे,
मतलब ग्रोथ रेट बहुत अच्छा है यार इनका, ठीक है ना, क्योंकि इन्होंने मेहनत की है।
सही बात।
1971 में ये आज़ाद हो रहा है, ठीक है, तो कितने साल हो गए, ज़्यादा मैक्सिमम लगा लें तो 50 साल के करीब।
50 साल, हाँ, ज़्यादा टाइम नहीं है।
तो पाकिस्तान तो उससे ज़्यादा पहले का है ना।
हाँ।
लेकिन जो है ना बांग्लादेश की स्ट्रगल मानने के लायक है, क्योंकि वो कोशिश करते हैं, उनकी जो है ना पॉलिटिक्स जो है ना, उनकी हुकूमत है वो भी उनका साथ देती है।
हाँ,
और इनका इंपोर्ट का काम भी ज़्यादा है, इंपोर्ट एक्सपोर्ट भी करते हैं ये लोग, उससे भी ज़्यादा फायदा
है ना। मैन्युफैक्चरिंग की खुद की कंपनी,
काफ़ी सारी चीज़ें खुद मैन्युफैक्चर करते हैं और बाहर भेजते हैं, तो तो इससे भी बहुत फर्क पड़ता है।
बहुत ज़्यादा फर्क पड़ता है यार जीडीपी में, इस चीज़ से बाहर भेजते हैं और लेते बहुत कम है ये।
ये भी है। और मतलब ये ओवरऑल देखा जाए तो बांग्लादेश यार
बेस्ट है बस, और क्या
बेस्ट है।
करेंगे, बांग्लादेश बहुत अच्छा है। तो फ्रेंड्स वीडियो देख के बहुत ज़्यादा अच्छा लगा, इस तरह बांग्लादेश को बढ़ते हुए कामयाबी की तरफ तो हमें बहुत ज़्यादा खुशी होती है। तो इस वीडियो के साथ आपसे इजाज़त चाहते हैं, मिलेंगे नेक्स्ट वीडियो में, तब तक के लिए
अल्लाह हाफिज़।